Imagine this. The year is 186 before the Common Era. You are a Roman father. Your family is respected, wealthy, influential. You've arranged an excellent marriage for your daughter. She's 16 years old. She's beautiful, educated, everything a Roman bride should be. The wedding ceremony was perfect, the banquet magnificent. Your daughter smiled, and now she's being led away for the final ritual, the one no one talks about. She looks back at you one last time, her eyes asking a question. You look away because you know what's about to happen, and you can't stop it. This is the ritual that Rome buried so deeply that historians are still uncovering evidence of it. What I'm about to show you is not mythology. It's a documented practice that reveals something about the intersection of religion, power, and systematic abuse, changing how we understand ancient Rome. Here's what we know for certain. Between the 3rd century BCE and the 2nd century CE, Roman marriage law included a provision that appears in legal codes but is almost never explained. In later medieval sources, it's called jus primae noctis, but in Rome, it had another name, Deditus Divorum, offering to the gods. If you believe that suppressed stories of what powerful institutions did to the helpless should be remembered, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your support shines light on practices deliberately hidden for thousands of years. Let me tell you what Roman fathers never told their daughters. Act 1 of the ritual, the legal foundation. In Roman law, marriage transferred a woman from her father's authority to her husband's. This transfer was called manus. But here's what legal texts reveal. Before this transfer could be completed, before a woman could become a wife, she had to be purified. That's the word used in legal codes. Purificata, purified. The Law of the 12 Tables, Rome's foundational legal text, includes a provision. Quote, "One appointed guardians of divine will," that's how they referred to the priests of the bona, the good goddess, quote, end quote. A fertility cult at the very center of Roman religious practice. Here's what makes this especially sinister. Roman religion was transactional. You give offerings to the gods give blessings, a simple exchange. But in marriage, the offering wasn't wine, grain, or sacrificed animals. The offering was the bride. Think about what that means. You're getting married. You're 16, maybe 17. You've been prepared for this your whole life. You know your duty, but no one explained this part. No one told you that before you belong to your husband, you belong to the gods, and the gods demand proof. Act 2 of the ritual, the underground chamber. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites across Rome reveals chambers built for a specific purpose beneath major temples. These aren't burial crypts or storage rooms. They're chambers with specific features. Stone beds, channels carved into the floor for draining liquids, locking mechanisms on the doors from the outside. In 2003, excavations under the temple of Bona on the Aventine Hill uncovered one such chamber, completely intact. Inside were inscriptions on the walls, not prayers, not religious texts, names. Hundreds of names, all women, all with dates beside them. Dates corresponding to recorded Roman wedding celebrations from the same periods. British archaeologist Catherine Jones spent 3 years documenting these inscriptions. Her 2007 report concludes, quote 2, quote 3. That's academic language for, we know exactly what happened here, but we're uncomfortable saying it outright. Let me say it outright. This is where priests claimed the right to consummate the marriage before the husband. The ritual worked like this. After the wedding ceremony and public celebration, the bride was escorted to the temple, not by her husband, he wasn't allowed, but by female attendants, older women who had undergone the same ritual. They lead your daughter downstairs into the darkness. The air is cold, the walls stone. They bring her to a door. Inside, a priest, or several priests. Sources aren't consistent. Here are the few fragmentary descriptions we have. The playwright Plautus, writing in 205 BCE, references the practice in a comedy later heavily censored. Only fragments survive. In one, a character says, "The gods get their share before any man." That's the law. It always was the law. Another character replies, first character. That line was removed from later versions of the play. The philosopher Lucretius, writing in 50 BCE, references it more directly in a passage medieval monks tried to erase from manuscripts. We have only one surviving copy, found in 1417. He writes, "And the law protects this theft with the word." The law protects this theft with the word. Think about the machinery of that system. You're a Roman father. You know this ritual exists. You know your daughter will go through it. But you can't refuse, because it's not abuse, it's religion. Not assault, it's purification. Not a crime, it's divine law. The system built perfect insulation against resistance. Act 3 of the ritual, the protocol of silence. Here's what makes this practice especially hard to document. Roman women who underwent the ritual were legally forbidden to discuss it, not discouraged, forbidden. The Lex Boconia, passed in 169 BCE, includes a provision on religious silence. Women revealing mysteries of sacred rites could be charged with impiety, punishment, exile, or death. That's why the historical record is so fragmentary. Victims were legally silenced, perpetrators called it sacred, and the only men writing history were participants or beneficiaries of the system. But here's what the patriarchy never understands about silencing victims. Silence is not the same as oblivion. And sometimes people find ways to speak without words. In the 1920s, archaeologists excavating a villa in Pompeii found a sealed room, not by volcanic ash, but deliberately bricked up before the eruption. Inside was a fresco depicting a wedding scene, standard Roman iconography, except for one detail in the background, barely visible. A woman being led downstairs by robed figures. Her face looks back. Her hand reaches toward a man who isn't following. The archaeologist who discovered it noted, quote 11, "They hid it in a sealed room, hoping it would survive, and it did, for 2,000 years. Think about the person who painted that. They knew they couldn't speak openly about the ritual. It was illegal. But they could paint it, hide it, hope someone would eventually see it. That's not passive acceptance. That's survivor documentation. Someone who knew the system would try to erase what happened. If this moment in history doesn't disturb you enough to want to know more, maybe you're missing the lesson our ancestors risked everything to preserve. Act 4 of the ritual, the aftermath protocol. After the ritual, the bride was returned to the wedding celebration. Hours had passed, sometimes a full day. Roman wedding customs included a curious detail that puzzled historians for centuries. The bride appeared before her new husband wearing a veil called the flammeum. This veil was never removed during the wedding. Never. The husband consummated the marriage with his bride still veiled. For centuries, scholars thought this was modesty, Roman virtue, proper behavior. Then, feminist historian Amy Richland analyzed medical texts from the era. The Roman physician Cyrannus, writing in the 1st century CE, mentions in a medical treatise that brides often showed signs of recent injuries on their wedding night. He advises, "The veil serves a dual purpose. It preserves modesty and prevents the husband from observing evidence of the purification ritual that might provoke inappropriate questions." Prevents the husband from observing evidence. Read that again. The veil wasn't modesty. It was covering up evidence of abuse so the husband wouldn't know his bride had already been assaulted. The entire system was designed to maintain the lie. The bride couldn't speak of it. It was illegal. Physical evidence was hidden. That was custom. And if she showed distress, trauma, fear, that was expected. She was a virgin. Of course, she was scared. The machinery of silence was perfect. Act 5 of the ritual, the breaking point. This is where the historical record becomes explosive. In 186 BCE, something happened that threatened to expose the entire system. A Roman woman named Hispala Faecinia went to the consul and revealed details about the Bacchanalia, secret religious rituals operating in Rome for decades. Her testimony, recorded by historian Livy, described systematic sexual abuse disguised as religious rites. Young men and women led into underground chambers, assaulted by priests, silenced by religious law. The Roman Senate was scandalized. They launched an investigation, arrested priests, shut down the Bacchanalia, executed leaders. But here's the interesting part. During that investigation, several women tried to testify about the marital purification ritual. The Senate refused to hear it. According to Livy, Consul Spurius Postumius declared, "The Bacchanalia are foreign corruptions, but the rites of bona dea are Roman tradition. We do not investigate tradition." That's how abuse systems survive, by calling themselves tradition, claiming antiquity equals legitimacy, insisting that because something has always been done, it must be sacred rather than criminal. The women who tried to testify were warned to stay silent or face impiety charges, but not all did. One woman, whose name isn't recorded, refused. She stood in the forum and described what happened to her in the chamber under the temple. She was arrested within hours, charged with impiety and public obscenity. Exiled to Sicily, forbidden to return to Rome or speak to Roman citizens. She vanished from history, but this survived. Graffiti inscription found in 1964 near the Roman Forum, dated roughly to 180 BCE, 6 years after the Bacchanalia scandal. In rough Latin, tradition is what monsters call their crimes when no one stops them. Someone carved that into stone in the heart of Roman power. Someone risked everything to leave that message, hoping someone would finally read and understand. Now let me tell you what happened next. What Rome couldn't fully erase. The ritual continued for centuries but evolved. By around 100 BCE, wealthy families found an alternative. Instead of subjecting daughters to the ritual with priests, they paid enormous bribes for symbolic purification. A ceremony without the chamber, without the assault, they argued, just with a different methodology. The priests accepted the bribes. Of course they did, because it was never really about religion. It was about power. Once wealthy families could buy their way out, the practice revealed itself for what it was. A system designed to allow powerful men to assault vulnerable women with legal impunity. Nothing more, nothing sacred. By the 1st century CE, the practice had nearly ceased among elite families, but continued among lower classes for another century. They couldn't afford bribes. Historian Juvenal, writing around 100 CE, mentions it bitterly. The poor still offer their daughters to the old gods. The rich offer gold instead. Even the gods prefer money to virtue. The system adapted, but never ended due to morality, justice, or recognition it was wrong. It ended because rich men decided they didn't want it happening to their daughters. As long as it happened to others' daughters, it was tradition. The moment it threatened elite families, it became negotiable. That tells you everything about whom the system was designed to protect. This is what modern historians are finally starting to recognize. For centuries, classical scholars dismissed or minimized these accounts, called evidence fragmentary, sources unreliable, suggested it was probably exaggerated. They did everything except investigate what really happened. Why? Because acknowledging this practice means admitting Rome, the foundation of Western law, the model of civilization, built systematic sexual abuse into its most sacred rituals. It means admitting Roman marriage wasn't a contract between equals. It was a transaction, including state-sanctioned assault as part of the legal process. It means recognizing that when we celebrate Roman law and civilization, we're celebrating a culture that protected perpetrators and silenced victims for centuries. That's uncomfortable. So historians looked away. But in the last 20 years, new archaeological evidence and analytical frameworks have made it impossible to ignore. The chambers are real, the inscriptions real, the legal texts real, the names of women carved in stone real. We can no longer look away. In 2018, a team from the American Academy in Rome published a comprehensive study analyzing all available evidence on the Deditus Divorum ritual. Their conclusion, quote 17, that's academic language for, this happened, it was systematic, protected by law, it was evil. But here's what gives me hope in this terrible story. The people who resisted. The woman who stood in the forum and told the truth, knowing it would destroy her. The artist who painted the hidden fresco, hoping it would survive. The person who carved graffiti into stone in the heart of Roman power. The families who found loopholes, paid bribes, broke tradition, because they loved their daughters more than they feared the gods. The historians who preserved fragments of truth even when the system demanded silence. They couldn't stop the machine, but they documented it. They left evidence, refused to let it disappear entirely. And 2,000 years later, we're finding their messages, reading their warnings, hearing their resistance. That's important because here's the lesson Rome tried to bury. Systems of abuse don't collapse because everyone suddenly realizes they're wrong. They collapse because enough people refuse to participate, because enough people document the truth, because enough people decide tradition doesn't excuse cruelty. The wealthy families who paid to opt out didn't do it because they suddenly developed feminist consciousness. They did it because they decided their daughter's well-being mattered more than custom. That's not heroic. It's the bare minimum. But it was enough to start breaking the system. One family refuses, then 10, then 100. Eventually, even the priests couldn't pretend it was sacred anymore. When enough people withdraw participation, even the most entrenched systems collapse. That's not just ancient history, it's a blueprint. Stand in Rome today. Visit the temple of Bona on the Aventine Hill. Now it's ruins, just broken columns and scattered stones. But if you go below, if you find the entrance to the excavated chamber, you can still see the names on the walls. Hundreds of names: Julia, Cornelia, Flavia, Fulvia. Women whose fathers brought them here. Women who underwent the ritual. Women who couldn't speak of it. But they carved their names in stone anyway, not as defiance, not as resistance. Just, I existed. I was here. This happened to me. That's all they could do, leave their names, hope someone would finally find them and understand. We found them. We understand. And we refuse to let Rome's version of history be the only one. If this exposed something you've never heard before, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll keep uncovering rituals and practices powerful institutions try to erase. Leave a comment with your thoughts. See you in the next investigation. Here's my final question. How many other rituals like this existed in ancient civilizations? How many other practices we call tradition were actually systematic abuse disguised as religion? How many names are still carved in hidden chambers, waiting for someone to find them and speak the truth the victims couldn't say themselves? The Roman marriage purification ritual isn't unique in its cruelty. It's unique because we have evidence, because enough fragments survived for us to reconstruct what happened. But the machinery of abuse disguised as tradition, protected by religious authority, enforced by legal codes, maintained through silence. That's universal. That's in every culture. That's human history. The question isn't whether it happened. The question is, are we brave enough to examine our own traditions? Are we willing to look at practices we've been told are sacred and ask if they're truly moral? Are we strong enough to call abuse by its name, even when it wears religious clothing? Rome couldn't answer those questions honestly. Can we? The names are still on the walls, waiting for justice, recognition, waiting for someone to finally say, "This was wrong. This should never have happened." And we'll remember them not as silent victims, but as survivors who left evidence, as resistors who carved truth into stone, as women who refused to be fully erased. Their names outlived the Roman Empire. Their testimony outlived Roman laws. Their resistance outlived 2,000 years of silence. We hear them.